Welcome to the Chris Armas era, the Ali Curtis era. We aren't really sure what to call it yet, but what we do know is that Toronto FC has officially named its 8th head coach. My name is Mitchell Tierney. This is Waking the Red Weekly, presented by Footy Talks. This week on the show, it's Chris Armas hour, although we'll have some tidbits, of course, from the recent press conference as well, maybe a bit of Canadian men's national team on top of that. James Grossi of TorontoFC.ca will stop by in 10 minutes or so to give us his take on the new hire, as well as plenty of other Toronto FC things we always get into when we have James on the show. Before we get into it, big shout out to our friend Chris Blanchette for the new show graphic upgrade here as part of season 2. The other two faces on that graphic, Jeffrey P. Nesker and Michael Singh. How you boys doing this week?
Hey, great, what's going on, Mitch? Jeff, how do you like your graphic?
Just put him on the spot right away.
I'm slowly getting used to it. But please, I mean, it's difficult to get used to cartoon Jeff in any form. So,
hey man, that's what I was saying. Just seeing yourself in cartoon form is always a bit weird. But seriously, shout out to Chris. He's super talented. That looks great. You got an upgrade going into season 2.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've said, more upgrades are on their way. That means Jeff won't be on the show for much. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. I had to get that in. Toronto FC making maybe an upgrade. We're not sure yet. But anyway, they've brought in a new head coach. We'd love to get your thoughts as well throughout the show on the Armas hire in the comments section. But let's run through his resume quickly so we know a little bit more about him. Began coaching with the Chicago Fire in 2008 as an assistant, but mostly known for his time with the New York Red Bulls organization. He was at since 2015 as assistant, 2018 as a head coach, won the Supporters' Shield that year, and then was let go earlier this past season. A lot of success in MLS as a player on top of that, which, the MLS familiarity was never the question here with Chris Armas, but now that it's official, the papers have been signed. We've gotten the opportunity, certainly, Michael, you have, to talk to him a little bit. Let's start with you, Michael. Your thoughts on the signing, on the hire.
I feel like there's a million different ways that we can sort of approach this. Of course, with Toronto FC, management, Bill Manning, Ali Curtis, sort of hyping TFC up as a big club. And then, obviously there's names that are pretty big that are linked with Toronto FC, and, for multiple sources as well. And, who probably did go through the hiring process. And obviously Laurent Blanc and Patrick Vieira and, more, more names beyond that they interviewed. And then obviously Chris Armas was appointed, and it's a little bit underwhelming at first glance, just because the reasons that I listed off there. We were sort of led to believe that TFC was kind of heading into this direction where they could be viewed as one of the biggest clubs in the world, and with a manager that would attract world-class players potentially, not just players in MLS. And that was my first impression. It was a little bit underwhelming, but then you dig a little deeper and you start to listen to what he has to say and why the hiring was done. And I think some of those reasons will begin to surface later on, but I think that Ali Curtis and Bill Manning did their homework. I think they did an extensive process, and I really do believe they think they have someone who is capable of pushing Toronto FC and making their team better, especially in their sort of vision, and specifically Ali Curtis's vision, who's obviously been handed the keys here. And it's Ali Curtis's guy. It's to an extent, it's Ali Curtis's gamble, where he's now in the crosshair. Mitch, I think you kind of wrote about that, and If this doesn't go well, I think blame will be put mostly on Ali Curtis, especially because he's making the sort of tactical decisions and we're turning the page on a new era. Um, and to go back to Chris Armas, I really do believe like his sort of philosophy, his sort of style play was something that Toronto FC were sort of lacking last year. That is with energy, as he said, and with passion. And perhaps that is a product of what 2020 was. I don't think anyone would blame Toronto FC for kind of like running out of energy towards the end of that year. But I'm excited to see what that freshness will bring out of the players. And I think there's certain players on this roster that Chris Armas will be able to get the best out of. It's just a matter of seeing how he'll use certain players that haven't been finding the same success under Vanny, and can he get the best out of them? I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts there, Jeff.
Yeah,
I'm going to save a bit of my response because one of my questions for Grossi sort of revolves around the hyperbole that comes out of the front office. But I will, I'll say this. I've watched, he must have lived in that chair in that living room for 48 solid hours because he was Zooming with the extra time guys. He did the TFC stuff. It was a full court press as much as a full court press can exist in the times of COVID. I loved what he had to say. I absolutely loved what he had to say. I liked, as much as the cynic in me will err on the side of LOL with the Michael Bradley video. That was sort of the first thing that dropped. He's cool. He sits at the cool table. Like you could easily see it that way, or as a kind of panic move by the front office because of the responses on Twitter and social medias. I liked seeing the 3-prong attack. I liked what he had to say. Outside of that, we're not exactly a pacey team. And so hearing him talk about, instigating a very high press and a constant press, had me doing the arithmetic on how many actual hamstrings TFC's first team has left and whether that's even achievable. And then I remembered that the sports science department left with Vanny, so maybe hamstrings dying inexplicably in training is now a thing of the past, but that remains to be seen. Look, it's difficult. It's difficult because we want to see him in action. We want to see smiles and high fives to the team. We want to see training sessions. We want to see the proof in the pudding, and we're not going to get that for a while. So we're essentially in a bit of limbo. And my fear is, how excited can you be? Can we sustain this excitement leading into when we finally kick a ball in earnest? And I hope so. And I'd like to think that these guys are all professionals, and therefore it's not going to affect them in the same way. But
there's a lot more news coming, and I just wanted to. You brought up something there, and that was his philosophy and what he was kind of his high press, for example, or his press, which is going to become like it's going to become the most common word in TSC Live is press. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on like that coming to Toronto FC, that sort of philosophy. Are you guys excited for that, or are you guys a little hesitant to see that? What do you guys think?
Well, what's interesting, I thought, from a lot of the things that he said was he almost felt, held back or held to a certain standard of tactical, nuance, just because he was part of that Red Bull system. Like there was constantly people talking to him about, the Red Bulls play this way, they press this way. Anytime he didn't really employ the press in a way that people, was kind of similar to what people thought it should look like and what it should feel like, he was constantly getting criticized. And there's going to be more freedom at Toronto FC. There isn't the same tactical,
emphasis
identity.
Mandate.
Mandate, maybe. Yeah. Perfect words. Both of those. At Toronto FC, there's this, there's this freedom that he'll have now to try and implement his system. Obviously, it's going to be a system that Ali Curtis believes in, and will bring in those players. But I do think that makes it, it was an interesting tidbit that he did feel kind of like the Red Bulls were really wanting him to play one certain way.
Yeah, I mean, he was careful. He was careful because he got asked a lot of questions about his experiences at the Red Bulls. And I think he was very careful to not blame his successes or failures. He didn't own up to them 100%, but he also didn't exclude himself from the narrative 100%. And I think that that's fair. Ask a Red Bulls fan if that's fair, and they'll probably say no. But I think that's fair for the new gaffer stepping in and getting grilled on the hard stuff. I'm going to bring up Will's comment because I maybe disagree about this. And that's simply because the first video that left camp was MB4. So, the hope that Armas is going to come in with a keen eye and be able to just separate the wheat from the chaff and set his line up without any loyalty or adherence to the old guard, I think isn't necessarily 100% true, because the first thing we learned about is, little baby Bradley was going to training sessions, and Chris Armas and him have a long-standing relationship. Well, I mean, if we were looking for a guy to do what Vanny couldn't, which is, potentially tell these guys that they don't get to start whenever they feel like it, I don't necessarily know if Armas is that guy either.
For those listening to this perhaps afterwards, if you guys didn't catch Will's comment, he was just saying,
oh yeah, sorry.
it's hard to draw conclusions with the new coach other than I think it's good news for the young guns, aka Bradley not playing every single minute. Is Chris Armas going to be the guy to tell Michael Bradley he's not playing 90 minutes in a match? That's a tough one. I think that's one of the question marks we'll perhaps have to keep an eye on as the season does begin. Is Michael Bradley's role going to perhaps be reduced, or was 2020 kind of a blip for Michael Bradley because of all the injuries he endured? And is he going to go back to being that beast, that machine he is in the middle that we know he has been and could be? Hey, who knows? And that's something we'll keep an eye on.
Yeah, does Armas' system protect him from being exposed so often in that number 6 role, which is our major rationale for calling out Bradley sometimes post game, right? Is he going to line up the squad in a way that doesn't leave Bradley so isolated there in terms of sweeping duties and that sort of stuff?
Hey, he was a defensive midfielder in his day, right? So that's his MO.
Yep,
that's true. James is here now, so we'll bring him on. But what I will say before we get to him, it's a big prove it season for Toronto FC. We've got Ali Curtis has to prove that his plan is the right one. Armas has to prove that he can implement that plan. We've got Bradley and Josie who have big things to prove, considering what they're being paid, their status with this club. There's a lot of guys going into the season hungry to prove people wrong. So I think that's going to be a massive theme for this season.
Yeah, and TFC has done really, really well with players and staff with chips on their shoulders. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt, guys.
Yeah, this talent times the energy and passion. Hey, it could be a great combination.
There you go. We got a bit of a math equation to bring into this season.
Keep you guys
on
your toes.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get James on if he is ready to go. Now joined by Mr. James Grossi, TorontoFC.ca. always a great time when we get to pick your brain for all things Toronto FC.
100%.
Good to see you, boys.
Thanks, James. Thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, I mean, you probably had to know the first question we were going to ask you. Your thoughts on Toronto FC making Chris Armas their 8th head coach and what that means for the club going forward.
Coach, isn't it?
10th head coach, yeah.
Yeah.
2 are interim. I don't count the interims. Sorry, Chris Cummins.
What a hipster pick. Oh my god. He is right, guys, actually.
That's a future trivia question, Stumper. Yeah, I think like everyone else, I was a little bit surprised when Chris Armas was first announced. We'd sort of let our imaginations run away with us and imagining what was possible. But, since then and having spoken to him, I think it's grown on me a little bit as the right pick for right now with this team, we all sort of got, led down the garden path when it comes to the possibility of Patrick Vieira coming in and all those sort of big names. and if I go back to the day that Greg Vanney left, if you'd twisted my arm and made me make a list of 3 to 5 guys who could possibly step into that role right away, Armis's name would have been one of those guys. Alongside Ben Olsen, alongside a guy like Wilmer Cabrera, just because they know the league, they know the teams, they know the players, they can jump in and take over an MLS side and get off on the right foot right away. I think what brought me around to thinking this is the right choice is that this isn't a team that's looking for a new identity. This isn't a team that's looking for wholesale changes right now. This is a team that's they're in win now mode. They've got a bunch of experienced players who are at the end of their careers, and they're looking to reach the playoffs, and they're looking to lift MLS Cup. And anytime you bring in a new coach with new ideas, and the bigger the name, the more rigid those ideas can be about how things are going to go forward, that maybe this is the right pick to shepherd this group on to the next year or two and see sort of where things go. I sort of cast my mind back. The Vieira thing, while tempting, because we all know he's a soccer gentleman if ever there was one. Look at how the Atlanta DeBoer experience played out, where DeBoer came in with a team that was a winner, and he couldn't set aside the rigidity of how he wanted to go about things in lieu of what was best for that group of players that he had right there, and it sort of crashed and burned spectacularly. And whether that would have happened here with Vieira, who knows? He has his MLS experience. He's perhaps a little more familiar with it. But this is a group of players that just needs a hand on the wheel. They don't need somebody to reinvent the car right now. Coming from Red Bulls, the obvious question to ask him was how does he see this team improving? How does he see his vision impacting with this group of players? And the one word response that he had was energy. And I think if we look back to last year, there were a lot of times, and granted, last year was a strange year for a whole lot of reasons, and guys were justifiably tired at times. But the words like plodding and words like uninspired and meandering were some of the things that we could describe to that TFC attack, especially once they hit the halfway mark, and sort of anytime they broke away from defenders, they seemed to hold up and wait for guys to get back in position just to have to do it all over again. And sacrificing opportunity for possession was something that was a little too comfortable for the team last year. And so if Armas can come in and bring a little bit of that bulldog mentality and up the tempo and up the intensity as he sort of promised, and this team has the potential to be a lot more ruthless in attack than we saw them last year. And to be fair to Greg Vanney, he preached a lot of those same things last year. It wasn't that he didn't have that idea in his mind. It was just for some reason it wasn't coming off. And maybe after 5-6 years of Vanney barking at everybody, it's a good idea to have somebody else lighting a fire under their behinds. And I think the biggest takeaway of this whole thing was something that Laura Armstrong hit on in her piece, was that this is now Bill Manning and Ali Curtis's team. Greg Vanney had a lot of sway in that room, and he was very much the face of the club for those 5-6 years. And so for the first time in a long time, and perhaps the only time in TFC history, we actually have a front office that each person has approved or been on board for the hiring of the person below them, which is going to be something. That's probably the way that it should happen. I don't have a lot of front office experience, but I imagine that having the man that's responsible to you be your man is important when it comes to the decision-making structure. And Armas's job is going to be to focus on that first team and to wring every ounce out of them. And so I'm pretty excited about what the potential for this could be. Michael Bradley spoke very highly of him. Armas was a fascinating guy, and a guy that I look forward to talking to more. And perhaps the last point that I would make is that for anybody who was really looking forward to a big name and all the flash and glitz that comes with that, would be that with so much uncertainty ahead for this season, we have no idea what the schedule is going to look like. We have no idea if TFC is going to be playing in Toronto, let alone the possibility of labor disputes or whatever it is that ends up coming up this year. You need somebody who's going to be flexible and know somebody who understands the lay of the land. And we always say it, but MLS is a unique beast in the soccer world. And so bringing in somebody that's familiar with drafts and international borders and all that sort of thing was just a step. It was perhaps the wise move at a time full of such uncertainty.
100%. I mean, you can't ignore what the pandemic has done here, and I think it impacted TFC's hunt, but I also think it impacted their decision. Can I move? Can I do this? My question first. So, because you talked a lot about it, do you think it's obvious that there was a lot of hyperbole from the front office, right? My phone is ringing off the hook. We're getting a clone of Pep and Klopp together. We're going to mash them up together. It's going to be Robo Klopp. It's going to be the best coach in the world.
Did you go? You didn't say Robo Klopp?
I did say Robo Klopp.
Okay, good. I want to make sure.
No, I did that on purpose because
good.
I copyright that. I wrote here we expected the moon and got a moon rock, which I think is kind of unfair to Chris Armas. But it's occurred to me that there are certain parts of TFC fandom that won't be happy unless we get RoboClub. And while I think that that's great, I also think it's exhausting because trying to explain a certain perspective that we were never in the market for Klopp and Pochettino and et cetera, and a lot of people define that as a big club. So there needs to, I think maybe we need to separate a big MLS club with a big soccer club, which isn't necessarily
Jeff, what's your question?
Sorry. Do you think that the hyperbole was smart, or do you think that that's the real issue here? Is that they were shooting their mouths off and they created the impression of something different than they actually got, and that if they could go back in time, maybe they wouldn't have been so blustery?
I think that the tricky part here is, I parse everybody's words pretty carefully, and I listen closely to what Ali Curtis and what Bill Manning say, and I don't think they ever promised RoboClop. You know what I mean? The tricky part is that everybody hears what they want to hear when it comes to something like a coaching search. And so saying that his phone is ringing off the hook, it could be all, under 12 coaches in Toronto are calling Ali Curtis because they think they're ready to step up to the big time. So, when we hear things like that in a worldwide search, we sort of get ahead of ourselves and we get excited. I think the one thing I would say is that, we probably need a better look inside the process to understand really what's going on. Like, if we had found out that, this day he's talking to this person and they're looking at this person, then those words don't seem like hyperbole. They seem a little bit more plain spoken than the way that our imaginations can run away with us when presented with a situation like this. I think the one tricky part there on top of that is that, the more that these negotiations, the more that these conversations take part in the media, the more that it colors the way that things turn out. And the TFC in the last couple of years have done a pretty good job of sort of keeping everything in-house, keeping word pretty tight. I think we were all pretty surprised when Vanny left. And so, I think to get to the bare bones of your question, I think they would say that they were just speaking honestly and it wasn't hyperbole, and that people ran off with that. And the only solution between like sort of speaking plainly and people's imaginations is to sort of give us a bit more of a play-by-play of what's actually happening, but nobody's ever gonna reveal their call details like that. So it's sort of the nature of the game. Like I mentioned, I think I joked in Slack that I hear Sir Alec is available. But, whether that's going to happen or whether that's the right pick for right now or whether that's just somebody's imagination running away with them is it's half of the hot stove conversation that we have around these things.
Absolutely.
It's a good point, James, and really well said. Everything that you've kind of brought here to the conversation, I think it brings valuable points that people sometimes overlook. But I just want to move on. Sort of one of the pieces that you wrote on TorontoFC.ca was about the young guns, and that's one of my favorite topics. So, do you think Chris Armas's impact here in Toronto FC will be a good thing for the young guns? Does it change their sort of trajectory, or do you think they're on that same sort of path Vanny had them on before Armas arrived?
It's tricky, like every player's path is their own. And the one thing that Greg always sort of, Greg Vanny, when I spoke to him about young players, always emphasized with me was that no player's progression was ever going to be linear and up. You know what I mean? There are going to be players who take a few steps forward for a couple months and then take a few steps back for a couple months. And, you know, I look at a guy like Jacob Schaffelberg, who burst onto the scene in 2019, and he was the hot new thing, and everybody was loving what he brought to the game. And then 2020, he basically disappeared. Had a super quiet year, and then he's winning penalties for Canada Team White or whatever it is that we're calling him in the closed match game. And so, you know, I think for every player's individual journey is their own. And the coaches that come in and the opportunities that are given to them can definitely sway the way that things go. But it's such a I don't know a ton about this, to be honest. You know, I'm not a coach. I've not been around guys who as they've come up, but it is such a sort of it's such I don't want to say crapshoot because that implies that there's a luck element to it, but it is such a mixture of determination and hard work and opportunity and taking those opportunities that are given to you that really makes the difference for these guys. I think what we do get with Armis is a guy who has shown some commitment to playing players when they're ready. You know, I think it's fair to say that Greg Vanney was a little bit hesitant at times to give guys minutes when maybe it wasn't what was best for the team, but it was what was best for them. But that too is a balancing act. You know, if a guy is going to be a fact, if your team needs the 3 points, is it more important that you get the 3 points, or is it more important that you get somebody an hour's worth of time? I do think last year in particular there was a lot of room for the last 25 minutes or so to give guys minutes. You know, you had the 5 subs. Just throw somebody on the game. I think what Vanny would say is that too often the balance of the game was hanging there, and that would have been a risk that wouldn't have been fair to the rest of the team or to the fans to perhaps sacrifice a result. But you know, we look at the Tyler Adams thing, and Armis himself said that he wasn't sure that he deserved credit for that. Tyler was just Tyler. But the opportunities will be there for these guys. And you know, this year, again, I wish we were talking when we had a schedule or had some idea of what the year would look like. But there's a lot of guys that are really hungry for minutes. But there's a lot of first-team senior professionals that are really hungry for minutes, like that aren't guaranteed time on the field. So we're going to have to wait and see. I think what I would close with is saying that I think he'll be fair to everybody, and if they earn their opportunities, they'll get it. And that's sort of how I interpreted what he said the other day, and we'll sort of see where that goes and try and hold his feet to the fire a little bit if that comes about. And you know, sooner rather than later, I'll have him talking about TFC2 as well.
Let's go. That's what we're all here for.
Yeah. Since I screwed up the order, I'll ask my question. Do you think TFC signs a DP this window?
I think they're shopping for one. I think that's pretty clear. You know, Pablo Piatti is not going to be returning as a designated player. And Ali Curtis was pretty plain saying that they're looking for a goal scorer. He did sort of, as an aside, mention last week when we were speaking about Armis that whether it's in this window or whether it's in the summer is something that's sort of up in the air. You know, I think it all comes down to who the player is, what their contract situation is, whether they can be allowed to leave for free or whether a fee can be negotiated. You know, we saw back at the start of 2019 that Jovinko and Vasquez leaving sort of forced TFC's hand, and the 3-month saga that was getting Pozuelo over here and the large transfer fee that had to be that was required to pry him free. I don't think that was a situation that Toronto would have put themselves in if they were planning for the long term. And I think that is very much the way that Ali Curtis and Bill Manning like to go about things, is that they have a plan and they have a, you know, Ali says the word process as much as anybody I've ever spoken to when it comes to how it is that he goes about doing things. And so, you know, we know that they are in the market for one. We know that Piatti is not going to be that man. We know that it is a goal scorer, and goal scorers are few and far between, and they tend to be expensive. And so the one thing that I can say for certain right now is that they aren't going to rush into making a decision that they think isn't the right one for the team and isn't the right one for this moment. You know, if the guy that they
Nope. I think we lost him.
That's okay. I'll finish what James was saying there.
Yeah.
I got you, James.
Thank you.
There you go, James. We got you back. Actually, let's save me. Here you go, James. Go for it.
You can finish what you're saying.
Apologies, gentlemen. My phone rang.
No worries.
So that was,
Technology,
yeah.
love it.
Technology failed me. I would say that they're not going to rush in and make a decision based on getting a body in versus getting the right guy in. And to be honest, I think they have a pretty deep roster as constructed at the moment. And if they have to wait a couple months for somebody else to come in, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. But it'd be nice to have something else to talk about this. So I'm hopeful that they do.
No way. That's key though. Like, I think you made a good point that TFC aren't in a rush to add a player to help them in February, March, even May going into there. Like, I think TFC understand they have a roster right now that can definitely compete in the Eastern Conference, especially if you consider potential of Josie Altidore bouncing back in 2021. But James, what I want to ask you is, looking at the rest of the TFC roster, what are some of the biggest needs that you think, aside from a designated player, that this team needs?
I think you have to start at the back line, and you have to start with a little bit of depth. Chris Mavinga and Omar Gonzalez are your ones and your twos in those center back positions right now. Can they play? Again, I don't know how many matches this year is going to be comprised of, but can they play every match? Are we going to have the sort of hectic schedule that we had last year? You're going to need some depth right there. Eric Zavaleta and Laurent Simon doesn't look like they will be returning at the moment. I wouldn't rule anything out, to be honest. Ali Curtis did mention that, in addition to the DP search, they're going to be looking to fill a couple of spots and possibly send in some guys out on loan and stuff like that. I'm not sure what Julian Dunn's future lies ahead. Whether he is that man, whether he's ready to step up, whether Rocco Romeo is ready to step into that role, or do they go out and find, either a potentially somebody in this upcoming draft, somebody from outside that can be a younger player, or another veteran guy that's going to step in and be able to sop up some minutes here and there. So, I think when I look at the current roster, I think that central defense is a real key need area. Depending on what happens with Justin Morrow, some fullback depth will probably be something that's on the shopping list. And then, I would probably look at somewhere in the wide attacking positions. If Paulo Piatti is not coming back, you're going to need somebody that can chip in some goals, somebody that can add a little bit there. But, that said, they do have a lot of young guys that are ready for their chance. Jaden Nelson, Schaufelberg, all those sort of guys. So, I think the roster stands at like 25 or 26 players as
Even
is.
more,
So there's not a lot of room to make very many additions, and they've got a lot of internal guys that are pretty hungry for their chances. Jordan Perutz is a guy that we're looking forward to seeing this year, that they signed halfway through last year for this season. So it's a pretty solid team. I'd say the only real need is that center back and possibly a fullback if Morrow is not returning.
No, I agree with you, James, and I think we've spoken about that. I think TFC needed another center back because Julian Dunn's the third center back on their depth chart right now, and even Rocco Romeo, he's on loan until June overseas there in Denmark. So they only have 3 center backs technically on their roster, and one of them only has 1 game of MLS experience. And then
what a game that was!
Yeah, what a game that was, really. As an 18-year-old or 17-year-old being lit up 5-6-1 against the Houston Dynamo. Definitely not fun for Julian Dunn there. But also left back, you mentioned they have no natural really left back on their roster, I think. And, no, Griffin Dorsey was touted to be one for the future who could potentially even fill that role. But beyond that, I really don't think
guys who've disappeared.
Yeah, I really don't think that there's too much depth there. Obviously, Oro or Richie could play on that side, but they definitely need someone at left back. I think if they want to play a 4 at the back or even 5 at the back, and then that winger I think is huge, especially if you're not bringing back Piatti. And you mentioned that they need goals out of that winger. That's going to be tough if it's not Piatti because they are a little bit tight up against that salary budget. So perhaps it is going to be those young guns that are going to have to step up and maybe fill that void there in the wing. And hey, they're looking pretty good at Canada camp, Mitch. I think you want to ask James about that.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into my question. You know, I would have.
We do.
I'm always going to ask you at least something about the Canadian men's national team, and putting a Toronto FC spin on it, though. Who are you kind of keeping an eye on? Obviously, pretty tough to keep any sort of eye on anyone at camp, but stuff gets out, that sort of thing. We got 15-second clip of some highlights from an inter-squad scrimmage game. Hopefully, some other game actions later on in the camp as well. But who are you? Who do you think kind of needs this camp right now to boost their stock in Toronto FC circles?
In TFC circles, it's tricky because the two guys that I find most interesting, Noble Okello and Ralph Rizzo, two guys that, Noble has the physique to go wherever he wants to go in this game. And Ralph had the composure last year making his debut that sort of makes you feel like he would be undaunted in any situation. But they both play the position that is perhaps the one position at TFC that does not require somebody to step in and get some minutes. So that's going to that's going to be really tough for both of those guys to break in. We saw, Marky Delgado missed a fair bit of last year. Jonathan Osorio missed a fair bit of last year. If you can find some way of if Armas is playing with a 3, finding ways to get those guys games every once in a while, I think that's going to be super important for the health of the club long term, and also for the team this year, is to have extra guys chipping in the middle of the park. I still think that Jaden Nelson is perhaps the most MLS ready of that group in terms of a guy that can come in and make an almost immediate impact. We saw it in sort of glimpses last year, that same sort of fearlessness and that ability to dance around guys. He was a little bit raw, but one thing he's never been afraid of is putting in the work that's required. And so I'm really curious to see where he goes this year. And, of course, Schaffelberg, we all love our Jacob Schaffelberg. And, he very much was on the sidelines last year. And I think that was an intentional message from Vanny in terms of, Schaffelberg's one move was to push the ball past a guy and to beat him around the outside. And that's all well and good when you're playing against teenagers or against young professionals. But once you step onto the professional game, they're going to learn pretty quick what your one trick is, and they're not going to let you do that. And so I know Schaffelberg was tasked by Vanny with learning to go inside. He wanted him to add that different element to the game, to be able to mix it up and to be able to handle the physicality that you need when you can't just push the ball past somebody and sprint past them. And so to see whether that year of being able to work on that has really allowed him to develop as a player is something I'm pretty excited to see. Based on his penalty win in that 10-second clip that we saw the other day, it's entirely possible. I do believe it was a little further infield than around the outside. So I mean, that's as much. I'm taking as much hope from that one clip as we can for him. And Jaquil is just it's a fascinating case of if you're good enough, if you're young enough, if you're good enough, what's that saying?
Age doesn't matter if you're good enough.
Yeah. There's a catchier way of saying it.
Yeah, way catchier, but
It's
we need John Herdman on here. He says it all the time.
Exactly.
I misplaced my soccer idioms. So
it's going to pop into my head the second we end.
Oh, I know.
But yeah. To see what he can do, we saw very, very little of him, and he's a guy that barely even played for TFC 2 back in his before signing his professional contract. He was more of a TFC 3, TFC whatever U15 or whatever it is that they call that group, TFC 7, I believe.
Eric's got it. If you're good enough, you're old enough. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. To see where he goes, fascinating young guy, really promising talent, and I can't wait to see a little bit more of him. But I think I would say with all these guys, let's give them their chances, but let's also be patient with them.
Yeah, we misquote one thing, and all of a sudden the comments section comes alive.
Blowing up.
everybody letting us know. But I think it's a big year for the young guns because it's not necessarily a clean slate when a new coach comes in, because obviously Curtis is here and we have the most of the management structure is still the same, and we'll have their they're saying the players, but there's definitely opportunities this year with a new coach for a lot of these young guys and a lot of different players to take a step forward. So James, I think we'll let you go here, but thank you so much for joining us as always.
My pleasure. Good to see
Thanks,
everybody.
James.
Take care, stay safe, all that, and we'll have some soccer to look forward to sooner rather than later.
Let's go.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
No.
We gotta
charge for that, man. And like that's some valuable insight. And
Oh yeah.
anytime James comes on, like we learn so much. So shout out to James. Thank you for doing that. And yeah, we see all you guys in the comments. And is anybody talking about Achara? I think that's George Armstrong saying that. And that's an interesting shout because
right winger. We need, Pablo's gone.
We're talking about
baby.
We need goals at a high clip, right? And Achara kind of fills that mold, but he suffered his ACL injury in July. And usually for things like that, I would say like 9 months is sort of that timeline for when you're expected to come back. But by all accounts, Achara has been like beyond his timeline. He's been ahead of his timeline. So perhaps there is a chance that we do see Achara, sometime earlier in the season. I think January would be
him
a
early
little
in the
bit too
season
early. Yeah, exactly. I think January and February might be a little bit too early, but hey, I could be wrong about that, and perhaps he does prove us wrong and shows up ready and hungry to fight for his spot, because I don't think anyone's giving anything to Achara even when he comes back. I think he has to come back and earn that. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of fitness level he's in when he does come back.
With those injuries, you always have to be a little careful, because you saw with Piatti or a guy like Ricardo on my Leicester City, who's coming back to fitness, right? They'll come back maybe for like one game or so, and then just because of the way the injury is and how you can't really work out properly all the other ligaments and little things around that, a lot of minor pulls, that sort of thing. So it might be a little stop start when Achara comes back, just based on the injury. I know
management. That's my
Dr. Tej is cheering me somewhere with this assessment, or he's mortified, one of the two. But yeah, no, I certainly think Achara will end up being a big part of Toronto FC next season. It's just it might not be, he might not necessarily hit the ground running, for lack of a better better term there.
Yeah.
But I did want to talk a little bit about Piatti, as you mentioned, because you had that question, Michael, at the end of the Armis press conference there, and Piatti's an interesting one to me. It seems like they are still talking to him. I just think he would be such a good fit for the Armis system, because we know he's a high action player. We know he was one of the best Toronto FC players in terms of pressing opposing players, in terms of winning the ball back last year. Obviously, it's the financials that make it important, and I don't think he's an irreplaceable player, but proof of concept, certainly. We know he works in the Toronto FC system. What are your thoughts on that whole situation, Michael, and where it goes from here?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's pretty. Like, I think the bar has been set for when it comes to Pablo Piatti, and in saying that, I mean, in the TFC's hunt for a designated player, Pablo Piatti came in. He scored 4 goals, 4 assists, and I want to say maybe 17 games, something like that. I don't have the exact number of games off the top of my head, but it wasn't as much tangible production as we wanted in his first season here. But he linked up so well with Alejandro Pozuelo. He filled a need on the roster that no one else really could, and that was just being a consistent winger who could really offer anything and keep possession. He was capable. If he had to, he could take someone on 1v1. So Pablo Piatti is going to be someone I think this team potentially misses fairly well, if they a lot, if they can't bring him back. Although Ali Curtis did say that they are playing a little bit of phone tag, and they still are having those conversations to potentially bring Pablo back as a non-designated player. Yeah, something like that.
They're having a glass of wine together, Mitch.
Yeah, maybe, but I don't know, man. Like, Pablo's willingness to go through that MLS re-entry draft, I think it shows that he's at least considering other options. And if that's the case, then I think the only way he comes back to Toronto is on a hometown discount. And if he wants to do that, I'm all for it. But it's not written out by any means. Like, it's not off the table by any means. Like, it's definitely still possible. It's just, again, he would have to be taking that discount, and that's something you got to hope for as a TFC fan, as opposed to expect.
I just think it's interesting. Obviously the DP tag changes everything, but when we signed him, we were worried about him being healthy, and that was the premier worry. And aside from a couple of knocks, I mean, he really proved his naysayers wrong. We were him, and there were many times that he was the fittest player on the team. Let's be honest. So then the goalposts kept moving, right? Like, it's like, well, okay, he wasn't injured all the time, but now we need him to score goals at an Arjen Robben kind of rate. I don't think we've been unfair to Pablo, but I have noticed that the metrics for his success or failure have kept changing. And again, that's kind of the curse of the DP tag in this league.
For sure. Go ahead, Mitch.
Well, I will also say I think Josie's lack of production hurt him as well, because when you have two designated players who between them put up 6 goals, 4 assists.
Very good point. Yeah.
Like then it just gets blown bigger. If Josie's out there scoring 10, 15 goals this past season and doing what we know Josie is capable of and what he's proven in the past, then I think we maybe aren't having this same conversation. It's different because then Pablo's playing his role. And there's less of a need for him to be that guy. But when they don't have Josie, when they can't rely on Josie to consistently score goals, they need someone else who can. And Pablo has proven at minimum to not be that guy.
That's such a good shout.
Such a good shout, man.
Yeah, you found the words for that perfectly. It's just like what really caught me off guard is TFC saying how badly that they needed goals when they were looking for a designated player, because you think about who you have on your roster, and that's Ayo Akinola, who scored the most goals per 90 minutes in all of MLS last season, is going to get another year older. And then you also have Josie Altidore, who's supposed to be one of the most prolific goal scorers in MLS, and he's second on the team's all-time scoring charts for a reason. And then you think about the impact that Pablo Piatti made in his first season. I don't think anybody's really disappointed by that. Obviously you'd want him to stay on the field towards the end of the season a little bit more, but hey, he played in that playoff game. He played, I don't remember what the stretch of games was, but a bunch of consecutive games in a short turnaround time. Again, I brought this up on one of our previous shows. I think I'd rather see Piatti as a designated player going into next season than Altidore, if Altidore is going to be the 2020 version of himself. So if we're, bringing Piatti down as sort of that designated player, then shouldn't we look at Josie Altidore as well? Especially if his job is to solely provide goals. So that's where the disconnect is for me. Is I think like TFC doesn't necessarily need goals from a designated player. They need goals from a specific designated player. A specific designated player. And that's Josie Altidore. So, let's say TFC turned around, they want goals. Are they bringing in another striker? Does that make sense whatsoever to compete with Ayo Akinola, Josie Altidore, Jordan Perus, et cetera, and Patrick Mahone, the list goes on. Achara,
I think that's why we're still stuck on this winger idea, because we don't want to overload.
What kind of player then are you looking for? Are you looking for a number 10 who can provide goals? Probably not, because you have Alejandro Pozuelo.
Please don't put him on the wing.
So if you're not going to be looking for a striker, you're not looking for that number 10. What position are you looking for to provide goals? And that's
winger.
The winger. No, unless I'm missing something there, and maybe taking some leaps. But so then, if that winger, that bar has to be Pablo Piatti. And again, I will go back to it. I don't think Pablo had a bad season last year, so I think the pressure's sort of on TFC here to, one up Piatti, and that's not going to be an easy task.
No, it's definitely not. The one thing I will say that kind of makes that task a little bit easier, and is this, the fact that Chris Armas, I think, was brought in as someone who will kind of agree with Ali Curtis's decisions in a way. Like, we know there was at least a little bit of a conflict between Greg Banny and Ali in terms of, the players they wanted, the personnel. I think him and Curtis and Armis are mostly on the same page with this, and I think that will speed up new recruitment, right? Because there won't be a new coach coming in, for example, like probably a Laurent Blanc, who would have really wanted his own players.
Neymar Jr. He wanted Neymar.
Yeah, exactly. He would have, well, not that caliber of player, but probably like
he would have, and then we would have to explain to him that that's not happening in this or any other universe. But there's been a lot of ink about this aspect of the Armis hire, which is that he doesn't get to decide about the roster in any way, shape, and form. I don't like speaking in absolutes, so I don't necessarily think that that's the case. He's certainly got a
not at all. No, not at all.
What I mean, and I also have a problem with the idea that the three of them in lockstep is somehow this wonderful new wrinkle in soccer tactics. I mean, forgive me if I'm wrong, but if I'm a head coach and my GM keeps coming with players and I say, no, they're all crap, I'm not going to be that head coach for a lot longer, right? Like, because I'm not agreeing with my GM, and whether or not we're in lockstep, that's just corporate culture, right? When your boss says, I know you wanted the laser printer, but I got you the dot matrix one, you make do with the dot matrix one for a little while until everybody else in the office is saying, I think this was a bad decision because the lineup at the printer is, 4 hours long. So yeah, I don't like speaking in absolutes. I don't like the concept that like somehow, we're going from one mutually exclusive thing to another mutually exclusive thing. It's a new era, but I don't.
Sure,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yeah. No.
I don't think anyone really disagrees with you there, Jeff. Yeah. Armis he's going to bring a freshness, but he still is going to be provided with a team that's consistent. That's been consistent the last couple of years. I mean, I don't think TFC's identity in their roster is changing. I think they were going to see a lot of consistency in the roster between like this year and next year. I think aside from a few pieces, as James kind of went over there earlier on the show. But I think Armis is going to be tasked with getting the best out of this roster, and it's going to be interesting pitting that against what Greg Vandy did with this roster, because it's going to be very similar, aside from maybe a Piatti or another piece here and there.
Yeah, I guess
forgetting about Gallardo and Armstrong.
Hey, no time for Gallardo. I saw that. I tried to ignore it as best I could. We have no time for Erickson Gallardo this week. I guess to just kind of distill my thoughts better is just that Toronto FC, they believe they're close, and I think, I agree with them. I think they are very close to being, the MLS Cup contender that, I mean, they were an MLS Cup contender last year, no doubt about it, even if it didn't go well in the playoffs. I think they're very close, and I think they brought in a guy who's not going to try and change too much in a lot of different ways. He'll build on what they've already built here and, just add that hopefully last little bit that can take them to where they want to go. And yeah, exactly, that little spark. And I think that's why the Chris Armis hire makes so much sense if it fully works out, is because that's the kind of coach he is versus some of the other options they would have brought in.
But make no mistake, it's a gamble.
For sure.
It's a gamble, and I think we should definitely get that out there, is that he's got to be perceived as sort of this, even though we are calling it a gamble, he's almost a safe hire in the sense that he has that MLS experience. Ali Curtis is familiar with him, and TFC has that consistent roster. And with all this uncertainty in next season MLS, you want someone who understands the league. So it's a little safe, but at the same time, hey, if that doesn't work out, it's not going to be all roses from TFC Live and all the TFC fan base, because there's going to be a target, and I don't think it's going to be Chris Armis.
I take one issue with the safe hire thing, and this is a point that I keep bringing up, and that is him coming in on the heels of Vanny to try and keep the ship sailing is in essence essentially what he did after Jesse Marsh in New York Red Bulls. So there is a matter of historical context here, right? He is trying to redeem himself for a very similar situation that's not too far back in the rear view.
In a sense, yeah. I think TFC do want, more Armis, less Vanny kind of moving forward, as opposed to the Red Bull situation, where I think they didn't want Jesse Marsh to sort of depart. Yeah, they
Yeah.
just wanted Jesse Marsh. I think TFC does know what they're going to be getting in Chris Armas.
Yeah,
I think that's an important note to make. But it's a fair point. I mean, Armas had his chance at the Red Bulls. I don't want to say he did. He definitely didn't do poorly because he didn't.
Supporter Shield is not poor. Yeah, exactly.
And the 7th best winning percentage all time. And that's a better winning percentage than Greg Vanney has, I believe.
Wow.
So like there are like some of that narrative is definitely overblown that Armas is like failed completely at Red Bulls, because that's just not the case. He was in a playoff position when he was let go. I think that, as Mitch kind of alluded to, there's a little bit of a disconnect in his philosophy and what was being put out onto the field there with Red Bulls, and I think that grew over into frustration.
And they sold all his players. They sold all his players.
Yeah, and that's also important to mention, is that the resources that Armas had at Red Bulls was tremendously lower than it was at Toronto FC. And I think I wrote this in my notebook. TFC is traditionally has one of the top 3, top 5, if not the highest spending club in all of MLS. And New York Red Bulls are traditionally, one of the lowest. I think they were bottom 3 the last couple of seasons. So that's going from like the bottom to the top, and I don't know. I'm excited, at least intrigued to see what he can do with that, new set of toys.
Absolutely.
I think we should wrap up the show here. But again,
we're going to talk about Gallardo because we're getting.
No, we're not talking about Gallardo. We'll get nowhere talking about Gallardo right now. But I think it just comes down to prove it, right? Like that's what this all boils down to. We won't know anything until Armas gets his team on the field. We see what Ali Curtis has planned for the next set of players coming in.
George, what I will say is I have something coming out on Erickson Gallardo. Like I have a little piece coming out, and Erickson Gallardo's name's in it. Just keep an eye out for that, because I'll write some words there for you about Erickson Gallardo.
Leave them wanting more. That's exactly what we do here on Waking the Red Weekly. Always great to catch up with James Grossi as we did this week. Infinite wisdom on Toronto FC and all things Canadian soccer. So really appreciate him for sharing it with us. Thanks to Kevin and Sophia, Chris again for the new graphic. And on behalf of Jeff and Michael, thanks so much for tuning in. And as always, till next Tuesday.
Cheers, guys. We'll see you next week.